future trends, deep insights, industry leaders. This is the iGaming Next podcast with your host, Pierre Lindh.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Solutions, the leading iGaming PAM platform with a modular approach, including many benefits like a fast, secure, and scalable API-based platform, integrated with all major third-party products and services. Make sure you head over to Pragmatic Solutions and join our smart thinking.
Do you believe in miracles was the famous quote by Al Michaels in the 1980s Lake Placid Winter Olympics when the college kids of the United States managed to beat the mighty Soviets in one of the biggest comeback or underdog victories that we've seen in recent times. And similarly, DraftKings released a quarterly report today, which kind of beat everyone's expectations and pleased the market here today, of course, Ryan. So it's great to have you with us here. First of all, Ryan Butler, our news editor of iGaming Next. And can you give a little bit of a summary, perhaps, of the Q2-2022 quarterly report of DraftKings here?
Yeah, not quite the miracle on ice, which as an American, obviously is very near and dear to our hearts, but it was definitely a surprise in a lot of ways. DraftKings beat its revenue estimates, and it beat its earnings per share estimates. It's one of its best quarters in a long time, more than a year overall. Then on tying that all together, it also, you see a big a sizable readjustment in its future 2022 revenue projections. So increasing that, also tied into that as well, is that it's expecting to lower its losses. Its losses this fiscal year are still going to be substantial, but they are getting better and better. So all in all, really, really good news from DraftKings. The stock spiked pre-market trading on Friday right away because of that, and then was trading up throughout much of the day too. So people were really, really excited. Understandably, there was a lot of good news that came out of that report. So yeah, really, DraftKings crushed it. And keeping in comparison that its biggest rivals, slightly different business models, but MGM, Caesars, different U.S. publicly traded companies during that same week did not do as well. Maybe a little bit of a revenue beat here or there. Solid, nice stuff, but it was not the kind of all around home run that DraftKings hit on Friday. So again, tying all together, really, really good news there.
Absolutely. I mean, as a hockey nerd myself, I have to force this reference as much as I can. That's why I do. But still, I mean, as we are recording this podcast now on the Friday afternoon, they are currently 14% up on the markets, 65% increased share value in the last something like 25 days since the low here a couple of weeks ago. And so it's certainly true that DraftKings is back in the game, let's say. And, something that stood out to me, Ryan, looking at the report, is the fact that DraftKings was able to increase their revenue in the quarter in comparison to the Q1 report, which obviously traditionally has a very strong quarter in the American online sports betting market. As we know, American sports are very seasonal, and Q1 you have this perfect storm, of course, of a lot of sports and a lot of big events happening at the same time, which is lacking somewhat in Q2. And at the same time, DraftKings was able to decrease the marketing spend and produce a better EBITDA result here. Can you talk a little bit about how was DraftKings able to increase their revenue despite the lack of major sporting events?
Yeah, again, to keep for the American or then maybe the foreign audiences, Q1 in the U.S. is the Super Bowl and March Madness, which are the two biggest, most bet upon sporting events. So yes, Q1 is a big one, and Q2 is traditionally our worst. Q3 gets better because it gears up to football season, which is by far the most bet on sport, and Q4 is the best. So keeping that in context, to have a strong Q2, perennially the worst for sports betting companies, and again, DraftKings, unlike its competitors, is just sports betting and online casino. It doesn't doesn't have the brick and mortar to fall into really is, again, impressive. And to answer your question with that preface there, the biggest thing we're looking at is parlays. DraftKings has implemented its single game parlays, which for anyone watching probably knows, parlays do better for operators and hold than single game bets. They want to see parlays. And now we are seeing some evidence here too that single game parlays do even better than traditional parlays with multiple different games in it. So having all of those into one game is really bumping it up. And if anyone is familiar, if you use the DraftKings now, when you log on to the app, it is everywhere. It is these pre-selected single game parlays. And it's the biggest thing. It's not just spread or money line or over-unders, the three most common or most well-known bets. It is hundreds and hundreds of small player props, things like that. So, right now baseball is the only major sport on in the US that's being bet on. But when you get onto the DraftKings app, you see everywhere, every single one of the games, there are different ones. And they're huge, huge long shots. Will these three specific players hit a home run? Exactly. Which is incredible. I mean, a player hits, even the best home run hitters hit 50 out of 162 game year. So 1 out of 3 games is the best season really realistic. So it's very hard for a player to hit a home run. But when you log on there, you will see, well, this guy hit a home run, well, this guy hit a home run, and all that. So it is huge odds payout. It'll be in American odds. It'll be plus 1,000 or plus some, these games, a lot of them plus 500, plus 600, plus 700 odds. But they just don't hit very often. And that is why the sports books, especially DraftKings, are so into offering them. It's a big part of it. So again, the parlays are so important to the company's bottom line. And it all ties in, Pierre, too, that we are going to see more and more of these parlays. The big announcement on Friday's earnings call was that they're also going to be doing these parlays within a parlay, in a sense. So now you're going to be able to combine 2 or more single game parlays into a single bet. So you could have 2 games that you really are following, and then you could have a single game parlay for one, and then you have a single game parlay for the other. Tie it all together. You would need, if you bet 2 and 2, so you would need all 4 legs to hit. Again, it would be a bigger payout, but your odds are significantly longer. And again, the reason why these sportsbook operators are offering these parlays within a parlay is because it's going to give them even bigger odds. So they enjoy this. This is what they want. DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars, BetMGM, everyone. They love when people hit these, they put in $1 and then they win, a 18-leg single game parlay that pays out, $100,000. That's great news to them because people go, oh, I can do this. And also, selfishly, arrogantly sell the single game parlay. If you, let's say, Pierre, you're a hockey fan, you have a team you're following and all that, you say to yourself, oh, well, I know this team really, really well. I'm going to bet, again, this player to score a goal, this team to get under, there's going to be a goal in the first period, there's going to be no goals in the second, all of these things. And again, the payout is huge, but you're not, even you, Pierre, noted hockey expert, you're not going to hit that one. And really, nobody is. But we're just going to see more and more of these, and it helps all explain why DraftKings was able to have a good second quarter, and B, that we're going to see more and more of these. FanDuel has been, again, successful, has the highest margins in the U.S., in addition to the highest handle, and it's because of these single-game parlays. We're going to see more and more of it. They're smaller competitors, in addition to the BetMGM and Caesars, but Bet Rivers, PointsBet, Barstool, that next wave, and then all the other companies, more and more parlays and more single game parlays.
Yeah, it's a great explanation, Ryan, and you're certainly right about that. I won't ever hit one of those parlays, and even how much I know.
Oh well, Pierre, you might, but just unfortunately nobody else will. You might still.
Yeah. Lucky in love, unlucky in gambling, unfortunately. But still, I follow. I'm an avid Reddit user, and there is a sports betting forum on Reddit, and this is exactly what you see as a clear trend in that forum: is that everyone is publishing this like crazy single game parlays, or it's almost like a fun activity, like who can come up with the craziest single game parlay or just parlay in general. And that's all you see at the forums. Parlays. So it seems very much that this is a really hot trend within the sports betting community over in the States right now. And I suppose this is what DraftKings is now reaping the rewards of, so to say.
Yeah, and it also it ties into your... I just want to go on that. It just ties in as well. It just kind of a larger idea of what exactly is sports betting, especially in the U.S. We are about 4 years into this, and it's now just really starting to fully kind of ingrain itself. This football season is going to be big. Again, football is far and away the most bet upon sport in America. But it's, again, I think I spend too much, if you're on Reddit a lot, I spend too much time on Twitter. And Twitter, there is so much complaints and there's so much attention paid to the sharp bettors that less than 5%, probably 1% of long-term bettors that I can actually win. People complaining about being banned and all these different things. But again, it's a small subset. And yeah, parlays are not really long, good, wise investments. You're not going to win these long-term, despite maybe seeing other people do it. Again, that's why the operators like them. That's why the hold is so high. But it ties into the other question. For the 98% of us that are not professional bettors, myself included, Pierre, you know, most people watching this, what is the point of sports betting? And that's a very, you know, deep existential question. But isn't it supposed to be fun? And no, am I going to hit that 12 leg crazy parlay? No. But does it give you something extra to it? If it's $1 or $10 or whatever, if you do it responsibly, isn't that kind of the point too? Where maybe you're like, I'm going to go down swinging. It always just ties in together. It's something I've seen. You know, we've been seeing more and more. But it's true. It's the lotteryfication, what have you, turning it more like a lottery. But if you look at the lottery in America and across the world, it is so much more popular than sports betting. People love the lottery, and I think almost every lottery player realizes they have very, very small chance of winning. You know, it's better of getting, you know, they say struck by lightning or attacked by a shark or what have you. But people do it all the time. The average American across the mean, across everybody, is hundreds of dollars a year spent on lottery tickets and all that. So again, if we become more like the lottery, if people are enjoying it and, again, doing it responsibly, which is critical, isn't that a good thing? And then isn't that also good for the long term, you know, for these books? Yeah, it probably is an issue that they don't post their limits and you can get banned for winning, or you can get reduced to, you can't bet more than 38 cents on a bet and all that stuff. And yeah, that's an issue. But the bigger thing is, if we in America are enjoying parlays, and if we have now more of these options and these single game parlays, and now these single game parlays within single game parlays, ultimately gambling and the gaming industry, all that, it is supposed to be entertainment. It is supposed to be fun. You know, it's Flutter Entertainment is the name of the company. You know, Penn National just rebranded itself as Penn Entertainment. You know, that's kind of the point. We're not going to become rich. We're not going to even become, we're not going to quit our day jobs from it. But if there's some enjoyment we get out of this, from the other side, obviously parlays are good for the operator, as we've hammered home repeatedly in the last few minutes here. But maybe it's also sometimes good for the bettor too, if it means more enjoyment for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. We are in the gambling industry, and the volatility is obviously part of why we gamble and why we bet. And you know, myself included, when I place a bet, it's not so interesting to me to put $50 to win 100, for example. It is much more exciting to hit that plus 1,000 or plus 5,000 or whatever it may be. So that's a bit more closer to like the true essence of what gambling is. I totally agree with that. Ryan, I want to ask you as well. I mean, DraftKings also launched Ontario during the quarter as well, and I haven't myself read into it that well, but it seems that DraftKings is able to hit that market share that they're aiming for, around the 10 to 20% market share that they're targeting. I don't know if you have more insight on the state of Ontario and the efforts of DraftKings thus far.
Yeah, from Ontario is, and also to put in perspective, is North America's most populated commercial online casino gambling market. In the U.S., we have some states that are bigger, New York with sports betting, but not online casino gambling. So important to keep that. Ontario, from that perspective, is very, very important to the industry. It is very interesting, though, that maybe some other companies, Penn Entertainment, which bought The Score, which is an Ontario-based company, to be a big deal there. Some of the others, Ontario is bigger. DraftKings has been very noticeably bearish on Ontario, whereas a lot of other companies have been more excited, whereas DraftKings says, oh, it's going to be the greatest everywhere. It has notably not said that in Ontario. So yeah, 10 to 20% is what, and Jason Robbins, the CEO, reaffirmed that on Friday's earnings call, they're in line with their estimates. could be closer to 10 realistically. It's kind of a side note, but it's been very frustrating to all of us in the industry in that Ontario does not report its numbers. New York, for example, reports fully its numbers by operator every week. New Jersey and every other state in the U.S. does it monthly at the very least, and usually you can go granular. Illinois does it by sport, and in New Jersey, anyway, there's a lot of detailed information. Ontario has given us nothing since they launched April 4th of this year. We are now in August. It's been very frustrating for such a big and important market where we have no idea where everybody's standing. So that side note aside, DraftKings also has this issues that though it did have daily fantasy sports and it did have a player database in Ontario, it is still struggling just because of the competition. There are more than 30 different operators in the province. You have all of the big players that we've talked about earlier today. A lot of the smaller ones have jumped in. They have a very wide open licensing process, so basically anyone can get in. And very importantly, they have companies that have already been there. Ontario had what was called a gray market, where companies were allowed to operate without a license. They don't face any punishment in Ontario. In the U.S., there are hundreds of offshore operators that are live now in every single state, even states with legal sports betting, and they will never get licensed in any single state in the U.S. That is just policy statewide, or across all the different individual states. We will not license you if you operated illegally in the country. Canada did not care. Ontario did not have that same issue. So Bet365, which anyone, especially from a European audience, is very familiar with, was maybe the biggest gaming company in the world from a sports betting perspective. They had been in Ontario for years and years and years. And not only do they have the brand recognition, not only do they have the name, the product, everything else with it, players are familiar with them. They're very familiar with placing their bets with Bet365. In particular, there are a dozen other companies as well, but they're the biggest name. So you have them, which, and again, we don't have the metrics, but we've seen with app downloads, that's a big deal. Penn Entertainment's The Score Bet, which is, for anyone not familiar, for an American perspective, it is like the ESPN of Canada and Ontario, where people are very used to checking it for their hockey scores or anything else that goes on with it. So it's integrated, well into their app, so it's very, very available. So that's a big company. They withdrew from the U.S. and have focused entirely on Ontario as part of Penn Entertainment's umbrella. So they're going to be a big one. Then you have other companies that are, maybe not super familiar with U.S. audiences, but there's there, and again, there's 30 of them, plus your big competition and all that. So if DraftKings even got 10%, they actually should be really excited. 20 is seems pretty unlikely. Even The Score is estimating 10 or so. They're saying 10, 15, what have you, and they are pretty well equipped. They've had good app download data. From what we can tell, they've done very, very well. So again, kind of long-winded there with it. It's interesting that such an important market for everybody else, DraftKings is sort of just hey, we're here, we're okay. They notably did not launch on April 4th, which was the go-live date for the commercial operators, so that gives another kind of stumbling block they put in there. They are very purposefully downplaying expectations, which I understand and all that, and they really are going to be more focused on the U.S.
Right. It makes sense. And I suppose as well there's an element here of seeing that Ontario had this thriving grey market previous to the regulation is perhaps just very difficult to estimate your revenue for a company like DraftKings, unlike when a new state opens and it starts from zero, so to say. There is legacy and there's databases built up, and it's just really difficult to know where you have the market, I suppose. But seems that they are off to a great start still in Ontario. Moving over as well around to California, which is obviously the legislation on potentially legalizing online sports betting is happening in November, of course. And if that market legalizes, it's predicted to be a $3 billion USD market a year. Absolutely huge price, of course. And I noticed that in the quarterly report, or Jason Robin mentioned that if the state were to legalize, we will see EBITDA losses peak in 2023, because obviously it would be a very expensive venture to launch in California. Now, my question is a little bit, considering that the share price has decreased as much as it has for DraftKings in the last year, it's down now something like 75% or so. Will they be able to have enough runway enough capital in the organization to do more big launches, do you think, or will they start accelerating these like big spending sprees in new state launches? What's your expectation here on the states that are about to launch, and particularly California? Then?
Yeah, and again, just starting prefacing with it, California, just in perspective, is far and away the nation's most populated state. It has twice as many full-time residents as New York, which right now is the largest. New York is averaging about $1 billion a month in handle. You can then extrapolate that, operator hold is about 7%. So you can easily double all that if California passes. So it's a big deal. To answer your question, yes, DraftKings will be poised to be in California and spend whatever it takes to get in there. It'll be incredibly expensive. California would be one of the world's wealthiest and largest countries if it was a sovereign nation. It's a big deal with it. But DraftKings has already spent $16 million just on getting this ballot measure passed. And for anyone who needs the background with it, every state is a little of the United States, all 50 of them kind of act like separate countries in this respect for sports betting. And in California, it will have to be approved by voters. There is so DraftKings, FanDuel, and MGM have spearheaded this charge for what would be statewide mobile, full online sports betting in California. A lot of the smaller operators, also Fanatics, which wants to launch a sports book, Bally's, Wynn, and Penn Entertainment have also funneled $10 million apiece. There's going to be more money coming in as we gear up. Election day, the ballot in California, it's you mail-in ballots, but that'll have to be done by November 6th. So we'll see in early November, anyway, the campaign leading up to it is going to be incredibly costly. There's going to be a lot of money to go there because the stakes are so high. California is such a population-rich state, plus it is a rich state per person, which is also a good sign for it. Plus, it has a lot of the most famous sports teams. It is the whole, it's called the Golden State. It would be the Golden State for these sports books too. So again, tying it all together, they will spend whatever it takes to get there. Then we'll have to see. The bigger question right now, Pierre, is, are we going to have California sports betting? So not only do we have the online component and all that, there is a separate competing measure for a retail or in-person or physical or brick-and-mortar only sports book. These are backed by a lot of the state's Native American gaming tribes. They do not want the online gambling because they fear that it will take away from foot traffic to their casinos. A lot of them, the casino, are in remote rural areas of the state, far away from the major population centers. It is the town, or maybe even the Native American tribes, their nation. It is maybe the largest or only economic driver for them, their towns, their communities. So there is a lot of pride, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of livelihood tied to these casinos. So they are fighting very, very hard. A bunch of these tribes have contributed tens of millions of dollars as well, not only backing the retail-only one that they want, but also opposing the online sports betting ballot measure. So the fact that there's going to be two questions right next to each other, they're called Proposition 26 and Proposition 27, that is going to be very confusing. The way they are worded is going to be confusing for people. Unfortunately, in the U.S. system with these, it's not, would you like online sports betting? It will be these kind of convoluted, long-winded thing, and a lot of people do not read them. A lot of people are going to be confused by them. A lot of people just won't vote, or they will just vote no just because they don't know what it means. Plus, they're going to be influenced by the advertising. In the U.S., we really don't have much limits on political advertising, and during campaign seasons, it is everywhere. It is every commercial. It is every radio ad. It is every billboard. They are everywhere. So it's just going to be people inundated with this. Both of these propositions are phrased in ways that are confusing. The online sports betting one talks about preventing homelessness and helping mental health problems, which is a great cause, but it also doesn't even really talk about sports betting as much. The retail one, it seems more like sports betting. People might think that I can only vote on one and not the other. They actually, in California law, this confusing things further. Sorry, everybody. But under California law, theoretically, both of them could pass and both of them could be enacted. We could have online and retail, but there's also could be lawsuits where they are deemed to be conflicting, and in which case only the one that got more votes would pass. One could pass and the other fail. It's just going to be a mess. We don't have firm projections on what's going to happen. Both sides, the pro and con camps for both propositions, have said the other one is going to fail and theirs is going to pass. So it's just very confusing there. But again, I know that was long-winded there, Pierre. Tying it all back to your original question, A, California is going to be a big deal. We don't know if it's going to happen, but B, if it does happen, DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars, BetMGM, which are the big four in the U.S., and then a whole bunch of other companies are going to do whatever it takes to have as large a piece of that pie as they can.
Well, my question is, can you do parlay bet on whether California is are gonna vote yes or no for Proposition 26 or 27? Because I'm down to put in some bets here if possible.
I like that. That'd be a good idea. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have political gambling at all in the U.S. It's not allowed. But that would be, that would be a great job. That would be awesome. Yeah, prop. Right now, it would. Yeah. Right now, I'd probably say leaning no. If I had to bet on that prop, that parlay, I would do no on both. But we'll see. It depends on what odds I get.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a side note here, actually, in the 2020 elections, the general elections in the US, that was the biggest online sports betting event in the entire world that year for the larger operators, Trump versus Biden, as a side note. And the guy who was the head of politics for Smarket, so like one of the bigger sports betting producers, he said that 80% of the volume that was bet on Trump. And so a lot of the operators during the American elections was sweating, because if Trump would have won, he was an underdog, of course, and it would have been the most expensive day ever for the online sportsbooks if he would have won them. So without going into politics and who is right and who is wrong, you can be sure that the CEOs of and the owners of the operators were very happy that Biden won that day, but for different reasons perhaps than their supporters. Brilliant, Ryan. Thanks so much for this. I suppose the final question of today is what's next for DraftKings now? Going into Q3, are there any particular states we should keep an eye on? Are there any states that are opening in this quarter? Any upcoming states that are perhaps being voted on soon? What's next for DraftKings?
Yeah, so and two things. I'll touch on the states. Also, football season's gearing up. Again, very important. So that was touched on Friday's earnings call. That's important. But yeah, DraftKings is going to be aggressive. They are live in 17 states now with full statewide mobile betting, and they have a couple on the radar. So the big one is Massachusetts, which last week, Massachusetts lawmakers, after years of debate, finally passed a sports betting bill. That was huge news here. Massachusetts is a very affluent, very well-educated state with very, very popular sports teams. So it's going to be per capita one of the best markets in the nation. It's a big deal. And then DraftKings is headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts. So they have an emotional attachment to that state as well. So that is going to be a big one. The no sports betting bill is perfect. Again, every state in the U.S. kind of functions as its own country when it comes to sports betting. There is no rhyme or reason. But they ended up doing a very fair bill. It included college betting, which is important in the U.S. It's a very college athletics, especially college and football and basketball, are very, very popular. So that was important. And also a pretty friendly licensing structure. There will be 15 companies, 15, that will be able to enter the state, which is solid. The most of any state is about 24. So 15 is a good number. It will allow the big operators get in, and DraftKings they aren't guaranteed a license, but they are going to get in. There is just no way that company, which had supported the Massachusetts sports betting bill, is in Boston, is just feet from not feet, but it's not a bad walk from their office to the state capitol. They're going to get in, so they're excited about that one. That's going to be a really important market for them. But also, there's some other ones coming up. So Ohio is launching online sports betting right after midnight on the morning of January 1st. So, right as the clock, as we say in the U.S., when the ball drops, right after there is going to be, Ohio will launch their sports betting. Again, another state, a big population, really popular sports teams. So that's an important one. We're also looking at Maryland online sports betting. That has been in the works for literally years. There's a lot of issues going on with that. But Maryland is another important market, high education, highly affluent. That's a big one. Then we're looking at Kansas, not as big a deal, but that's just another state there. They have a very popular basketball team, which will be interesting to add that. And then Puerto Rico, not technically a state, but a part of the U.S., and they will be, DraftKings looks to launch online sports betting there as well. So we got those 5 markets coming up in addition to the 17 they have, and just continuing along with DraftKings. They have been one of the biggest, and they'll remain so, again, especially with states like Massachusetts and Ohio coming up too.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ryan. And DraftKings certainly rising from the ashes here, and a very interesting a couple of months ahead. And their guidance towards EBITDA positivity towards 2023 seems likely. They're following the guidance, they're improving the guidance. So very exciting times ahead for DraftKings. I'm very happy to see that. Good for the industry for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Of course. Glad to be here.